Why does it feel like the middle class in America is running faster every year but staying in the same place? Not falling dramatically, not rising meaningfully, just stuck in a narrow corridor where effort increases but outcomes barely move. This feeling isn't emotional or imaginary. It is structural, mechanical, and quietly engineered by how money flows through the U.S. economy in 2026. Understanding this is not about motivation, optimism, or personal discipline. It is about tracing where value is created, where it leaks, and who absorbs the difference. In earlier decades, middle-income households relied on a simple equation. Labor income paid for living costs, leftover income accumulated into savings, and those savings slowly converted into security. That equation still exists on paper, but its internal balance has changed. Wages still arrive, but the distance between income and necessary spending has narrowed to a thin margin. The middle class is not poor, but it is compressed. Most households are not collapsing, but they are no longer compounding. One reason this compression feels invisible is because gross numbers look healthy. Employment remains high. Paychecks are larger than they were years ago. Retirement accounts show positive balances. Yet these surface indicators hide a shift underneath. The real pressure is not income, it is extraction. More layers now sit between earnings and ownership, quietly absorbing value before it can settle into long-term wealth. Housing is the clearest example. For decades, home ownership functioned as a forced savings mechanism for the middle class. Monthly payments converted income into equity and equity into net worth. In 2026, that mechanism still exists, but it operates at a different efficiency. Entry prices are higher relative to income, transaction costs are heavier, and ownership is increasingly mediated by financial structures that prioritize yield over stability. Even when a household owns a home, a larger portion of each dollar goes toward interest, taxes, insurance, and maintenance rather than true equity growth. The asset still appreciates, but the household captures a smaller share of that appreciation than prior generations did. At the same time, renting no longer functions as a temporary phase. For many middle-income earners, it is a long-term condition. Rent payments do not convert into ownership, yet they rise in step with asset values. This creates a one-way transfer. Income flows upward into asset holders without generating balance sheet strength for the payer. The result is stability without accumulation, which feels like progress until time passes and nothing compounds. Healthcare operates with a similar logic. Most middle-class Americans are insured, which creates an illusion of protection. But insurance no longer caps cost exposure in the way it once did. Deductibles, copay structures, and out-of-network gaps convert unpredictable expenses into routine financial friction. These costs rarely cause immediate collapse, but they consistently drain surplus. Wealth erosion does not always happen through crisis. Often it happens through repetition. Education, once the primary ladder into the middle class, now functions more like a toll road. Credentials are still required, but their purchasing power has diluted. Tuition costs and credential inflation mean households invest more upfront to access the same income bands as before. Student debt delays asset formation, but the deeper issue is opportunity cost. Years that could have been spent accumulating equity are spent servicing obligations that do not appreciate. Then, there is the structure of work itself. Middle-class labor is increasingly paid for time and output but detached from ownership. Productivity gains exist, but they are captured elsewhere. Automation, platformization, and financial optimization increase efficiency, yet wages reflect stability rather than upside. This creates a ceiling effect. Income arrives reliably, but it rarely scales at the same rate as the systems it supports. Inflation compounds this dynamic in a subtle way. Not the dramatic spikes that dominate headlines, but the quiet, category-specific inflation that targets essentials. Housing, healthcare, insurance, utilities, education, and compliance costs rise faster than discretionary categories. Middle-class spending is concentrated in these areas, which means effective inflation is higher than official averages suggest. When essentials inflate faster than income, the gap does not show up as poverty. It shows up as stagnation. Savings behavior has also changed structurally. Cash savings lose value over time, while asset participation requires exposure to volatility and complexity. Many middle-class households participate indirectly through retirement accounts, but access to liquidity is restricted. Wealth exists on paper but cannot be mobilized without penalty. This creates a paradox where net worth appears higher, yet financial flexibility feels lower. Another overlooked factor is risk transfer. Systems that once absorbed risk on behalf of households now push it downward. Healthcare risk, retirement longevity risk, employment risk, and even housing market risk increasingly sit with individuals. Middle-class households carry more responsibility without gaining proportional control. Responsibility without control is not empowerment. It is pressure. The psychological effect of this structure matters. When effort does not translate into visible progress, behavior changes. Households become more conservative, not because they lack ambition, but because mistakes are more expensive. Risk-taking decreases, entrepreneurship slows, and defensive financial behavior becomes rational. This further limits upside, reinforcing the feeling of being stuck. Importantly, this is not a story of failure or mismanagement. Most middle-class Americans are doing what the system implicitly asks of them. They work, comply, insure, credential, and consume responsibly. The issue is that the reward function has shifted. The system now prioritizes stability and extraction over accumulation for those in the middle. By 2026, wealth in America has not disappeared. It has concentrated. The middle class still earns, still spends, still saves, but it captures a thinner slice of the value it helps generate. This is why progress feels heavier than before. The treadmill is real, and the speed is not accidental. Understanding this is not about fear or blame. It is about clarity. When wealth feels stuck, it is usually because the pathways that once converted effort into ownership have narrowed. The economy did not stop working. It started working differently. This is only the first layer of the story. Beneath it are deeper mechanisms involving financialization, policy-driven incentives, and the redesign of risk itself. Those layers explain why this feeling persists even when individual decisions appear correct. That is where the real explanation continues. By the time middle-class households realize their financial position has stopped advancing, the pattern has already settled into place. What feels like a pause is actually a steady state created by how obligations, assets, and opportunity channels now interact. The system functions smoothly on the surface, yet underneath it redirects effort toward maintenance, rather than expansion. Long-term financial commitments play a central role in this design. Entry into basic economic participation requires larger upfront commitments than before, and those commitments extend across long-time horizons. Income earned in the present is often already assigned to future obligations, reducing the ability to redirect resources when conditions change. When flexibility disappears, upward movement becomes structurally difficult, even when earnings remain stable. Housing reinforces this rigidity. Shelter has evolved into a fixed financial position rather than a dynamic one. Entry requires sustained commitment. Ongoing costs fluctuate beyond household control, and relocation carries heavy friction. Even when values rise, households often remain unable to convert that rise into usable leverage without destabilizing their entire financial structure. Value exists, yet it remains largely immobile. This immobility shapes opportunity. Geographic movement becomes costly. Career shifts become risky. Growth increasingly favors those already positioned near expanding economic centers. Others remain anchored, functioning efficiently within their environment without access to the same range of options. Education operates within the same framework. Credentials function as access requirements rather than multipliers. Households commit significant resources to remain competitive within existing income bands. The outcome preserves position rather than expanding it. Over time, education behaves less like an engine of advancement and more like a cost of continued participation. Work itself reflects this shift. Output increases, systems scale, and efficiency improves, yet the share of value retained by individual contributors remains limited. Productivity supports larger structures while compensation remains bounded. The relationship between effort and long-term position weakens gradually, not through decline, but through compression. Asset participation appears widespread, yet control remains distant. Many households hold paper claims to growth while access to timing, liquidity, and strategic deployment remains restricted. Wealth exists in abstract form, unable to function as a tool for real-world optionality. When position cannot be activated without consequence, it behaves more like deferred stability than genuine leverage. Time becomes another constraint. Middle-class life requires constant attention to coordination, compliance, monitoring, and renewal. These activities preserve continuity, but do not create expansion. Energy is consumed by preventing loss rather than building surplus. Strategic thinking shrinks when attention is absorbed by maintenance. Starting position amplifies these effects. Households that begin adulthood with structural support bypass many friction points automatically. Others encounter each constraint sequentially. Progress continues, yet at a pace that rarely compounds. Over years, slow movement produces the sensation of stillness even when effort remains high. As these pressures accumulate, behavior adjusts. Financial decisions become cautious. Risk tolerance narrows. Long-term commitments are avoided. The system rewards consistency and penalizes error. The cost of misjudgment grows larger than the potential reward of experimentation. Under these conditions, preservation becomes rational. This environment does not generate collapse. It generates endurance. Bills are paid, employment continues, life proceeds. Yet advancement quietly transforms into the ability to maintain position rather than expand it. The structure favors continuity. Predictable participation sustains systems more effectively than independent accumulation. The middle class provides stability, scale, and compliance. In return, it receives access without leverage and security without expansion. By 2026, middle-class wealth in America feels immobile because the system converts honest effort into sustained balance rather than increasing ownership. Motion remains visible everywhere, yet mobility remains limited. Seeing this clearly changes the narrative. The experience is no longer confusing or personal. It reflects design. And once design is visible, the pattern makes sense without distortion or illusion.